So according to psychologist Carl Jung, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And why exactly might that be? What is really involved with complete and total acceptance of oneself? And does it really have to be this deep, terrifying thing? When we talk about exploring who we really are, it can be challenging as most of us come face to face with the reality that we might not really know. And while many talk about this practice of knowing who we are, really unlocking this experience of happiness and fulfillment and abundance, we never talk as much about the hard-pressed journey of truly knowing ourselves as shaping the key to unlock that door. And so that's what we'll be talking about today. So if you're interested, just keep watching. Hi there. I'm Dr. Erika, and on this channel, we encourage radical change to inspire far-reaching impact. I haven't fully decided the colors we're gonna go with today. I'm thinking bold and bright. And maybe my makeup won't be dictated by what I wear. I think it'll be one of those days. All right, so today we are diving right in to self-acceptance and true happiness while serving all the looks on another mental health and makeup session. So oftentimes we hear about self-acceptance and happiness going hand in hand. It's suggested that the more that we accept and honor ourselves wholly and completely, the more we allow ourselves to experience and accept and receive and really lean into happiness. The idea is that the more that we believe that we are deserving and worthy of happiness, the more that we actually enjoy it. I don't know about you, but this process of fully accepting oneself isn't really as easy as it sounds. It's something that I feel like I am still growing in as I change and evolve and grow into a newish person in different phases of my life. But it's something that I think is easier said than always done. We can find it really challenging to truly accept ourselves, who we are at our core, because like Carl Jung suggests, some of those bits are buried deep, deep down, and we did them on purpose. And those bits are the ones that really terrify us. Self-acceptance is more than just feeling good about ourselves. It's about really knowing our strengths and our areas of vulnerability. It is about facing things that we may have done in our past that we aren't, fully proud of, whether it was 10 years ago, 10 minutes ago, and really being able to say, those things don't define me, nor do those things keep me from being able to say that I am a person who is still worthy of love. Self-acceptance is truly about saying, okay, flaws and limitations, I see you, and really learning to work with them and your assets to make your life happen the way that you desire. So, big question. Is there a process to self-acceptance? Is there a step-by-step map that one can draw? And the answer is really probably yes and no. There are some things that we can do to increase the opportunities that we have to accept ourselves. And ultimately, it is a decision that we each have to make and come to. So let's talk about some of the tangible things that we can do to increase self-acceptance and really open the door to happiness, which is ultimately what we all desire. All right, first things first, we want to spend quiet time by ourselves. Seems simple enough, right? And definitely quiet time with yourself, depending on where you are, can really be a mixed bag. Some people really enjoy it and need it to recharge, like introverts like me. And then other people really find it to be quite anxiety provoking to spend time alone with themselves. And oftentimes that is because of this fear that we do not know what that will bring, or for some of us that are managing things like anxiety and depression, we know what it will bring, those kinds of thoughts, and we haven't yet learned how to really manage them. And while some people feel like they really haven't successfully learned how to spend time with themselves, it's because we don't do it very often. Anytime we get the opportunity, we pack our time with loved ones and really gravitate towards spending time with others as opposed to just spending time by ourselves. And so one of the first things that we need to do when we're walking towards acceptance is really get comfortable with being alone with ourselves. We can start out with just maybe 5 minutes and setting a timer, and then gradually increase that time. But the goal is to, while you're spending time with yourself, really take inventory of how you're feeling, making observations about how your body feels, how it feels to really be alone, and the things that come up for you, the thoughts and feelings and fears that are provoked. For me, quiet time with myself was something that I definitely had to build up. I am someone who is used to being on the go, used to doing things, used to always having some project, and that meant being surrounded by people. And so rarely did I feel like I got quiet time to myself, and that means that I had to learn how to take it and be intentional about spending time with myself. I also early on noticed that being by myself really sparked a lot of fears and kind of drew attention to insecurities that I had about people not wanting to be around me, or people only being and wanting to be around me because of what I could provide for them. And so having to sit with that and really acknowledge that that was one of the reasons why I avoided spending time with myself was really important to my process and my journey towards self-acceptance. Now, during this time, what we are bound to experience is a bunch of different thoughts. And these thoughts could be both positive, negative, and they can also be probably neutral, like thinking about the cheeseburger you want to have later. But when we are spending time with ourselves, sometimes those positive and negative thoughts float in and out freely. And we can sometimes when we are spending time with ourselves, those thoughts filter in and out. And it is important for us to be able to really comb through those thoughts and list out positive thoughts that we have about ourselves, and also be aware of those negative thoughts that come up. That really allows some of us to acknowledge for the very first time some of the real thoughts that we actually have about ourselves. Sometimes without slowing down, we just simply avoid the thoughts altogether. For me, as a part of this process, the negative thoughts were initially easier to come up with. They were easier to kind of come across my stream of consciousness, but they were harder for me to accept, if that makes sense. So they readily came in, and then I had a hard time really accepting that that's the way that I thought about myself. So like I mentioned, saying, that I spent time with people because I didn't really feel like people liked me and genuinely liked the person that I was. And so when I was sitting with myself and realized that that is why I surrounded myself with people, it was like, no, that's not true. That's not true. You have a lot of friends, people really like you. And I was convincing myself that I did not feel that way about myself, when the reality is that I did. I really had to spend time digging for those positive thoughts, which was one of the things that kind of alerted me to this really negative narrative that I had established, this very punitive and unrealistic view that I had of myself as a person. And if I had not slowed down to take an inventory of the thoughts that were going in and out, I really wouldn't have known that. Probably would have kept faking the funk. So the next step is, once we have taken our own inventory and gotten a sense whether we're able to fact check or verify or not, is for us to ask important, trustworthy people in our lives what our strengths are and what they really value about us. Now, I say important people in your lives. Most people say friends and family, but I want to acknowledge that sometimes friends and family can be really toxic and not have the most positive view or really neutral view. Sometimes our friends and family are the folks that really keep us from being able to accept who we are because of the kind of just toxic interaction that we have with them. So fully acknowledging of that. So these folks may be at work, they may be people in your circle that you have developed relationship with over time. But being able to ask them, again, what your strengths are and what they really value about you is super important. And it's important that you give them some time to think. Don't just spring something like this on them and expect them to have an answer like that. I am thankful that for me, those folks are family and close friends who have always been really encouraging and have been good at helping me reframe when I have talked negatively about myself in the past. All right. Now, with all of this balanced information that we have, we can silence what psychologists call the inner critic, that sometimes really loud and annoying voice that tells you that you aren't good enough or attractive or adequate enough to be doing what you're doing, or really even just to be existing. Now, some suggest that the best way to silence that inner critic is to talk back to it like you would a real life critic and person that was criticizing you. And it's best when it's done in real time or as close to when that critic rises up as possible. You can talk what you would say out loud or write it down like a script, and this back and forth between you and this funky behind critic that just popped up. Sometimes that dialogue may look like you really talking through with the facts and evidence that you might have around why something is playing out the way that it is, or why you're observing something, and really not allowing that critic to blame you for what is being seen or what is happening, but really being able to think through it logically. So the inner critic might say, oh, you did a horrible job. And you might counter that you actually were really prepared. You did the absolute best that you could. It's a marked improvement from the last time that you may have done something, and really be able to talk back to someone who's essentially trash talking you. That someone just happens to be you. All right, now after we've silenced that inner critic, we then have to set this intention that we are going to be willing to accept ourselves the way that we are. We have to just kind of make that commitment and that conscious decision to say, look, this is how I come. I may be working on growing and changing and evolving, but this is what I got right now. And I'm going to accept this person and love this person and love their willingness to grow and change and continue to develop. All right. The next step in this process towards self-acceptance is to actually forgive ourselves. So we are going to forgive ourselves for past and present and future mistakes. We all make mistakes. And one of the best things about mistakes and making mistakes is it is evidence of our willingness to try. It is also an opportunity for us to learn and grow. And if we decide to learn and grow from them, it's also evidence of us being able to make a change. And so we should not beat ourselves up around making mistakes, but should really learn to be kind and forgive ourselves. So after we have forgiven ourselves, we are now going to celebrate and really work our wins. So we all have wins. We all have things that we do really well, that we can take pride in. And it's important that we learn to acknowledge and celebrate them. Not everything that we do is bad, and we should never adopt that feeling or philosophy. So I am someone who traditionally has a really hard time with wins. We talked a little bit about kind of my negative self-narrative that used to play over and over, that inner critic. And I remember having a conversation with someone who is really important to me, my aunt, who gave me some really good advice. I think she was actively acknowledging my wins, and I was like, oh yeah, that's pretty typical. And she stopped me and really encouraged me to document my wins and to pause and really, spend some time there, to acknowledge that I had succeeded, that I had, these different accomplishments and wins, and that I really should write them down. And for me, that was really important, because when I had or found myself in a position in the future where I had a hard time recalling things that I had done well or ways that I had won, I have a running list now. She told me this a couple of years ago. I've got a running list of things that I do, that I log as a win, that I can reference when I'm having a really difficult time. Next, we want to speak to the highest, most ideal version of ourselves. This is the person that we see ourselves being in 10 years when we finally make it, or for some, the person that people tell us that we are, that we don't yet believe. But we want to speak to our ideal self. So for me, I have a conversation with myself, with my ideal self, that I call my Oprah self. I think about when I have made it and I am traveling internationally, speaking about how to live psychology in your everyday life in Africa. That is the self that I speak to. And I'm trying to decide whether I want to go to Tanzania first, or before I go back to Bora Bora for the third time, right? When I'm sitting down talking to my other really dynamic, prominent psychologist friends on my talk show, that's the person that I speak to. That's the person that I want to see and visualize and view, and that I want to have conversation with. She is someone who has accepted who she is, has used the things that have been challenging in the past to really be able to draw from her experience and connect with people in a way that is authentic. And I love talking to her. She tends to be positive and full of wisdom. And so I can oftentimes find myself asking that version of myself what I should do, how I should move, because it really allows me to kind of move not from a place of like fear in my current and present abilities, but allows me to live like daring in terms of my future abilities. Are we gonna bronze today? Meh. Why not? What the hey? we are doing this in real time, following along, we've got 2 steps to go. Next, we want to give ourselves heaping spoonfuls of the grace that we like to give so freely to other people. We afford people the opportunity to mess up and change and grow and develop into beautiful, wonderful people. And we tend not to give ourselves that same amount of grace. And so it's important that we dole out the grace that we provide other people in the same measure when we give it to ourselves. I was someone who gave a lot of grace around when people were late. I know that there's probably all kinds of differing views and feelings around when people are not timely and respecting other people's time. I totally get it. But every time someone was late, I was able to say, oh, traffic, they got caught up. It's possible, for people to be late sometimes. But when I was late, oh my gosh, it's something that I would ruminate around for, a couple days afterwards. No one could, I'm the only one that could never be late in life. And so I've learned to give myself that same grace and recognize that other people will give me grace too. And so it is totally fine that I accept that grace for myself. Finally, we are going to continue to speak positively to ourselves, over ourselves, about ourselves, and believe that we are worthy of self-acceptance. So going through these steps, even just 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, may not be enough. And so what we want to do and remember is that while we grow and change and evolve as people, and we learn things about ourselves, and we really face those things that maybe are areas of our lives that we just have to forgive ourselves for, and move forward around, or things that we are changing and actively working to do differently, we have to continue to speak positively over ourselves regarding our decision to do that. That is something that we really should give ourselves a lot of credit for, and recognize that we, despite things that we may go through and things that may happen to us, that we are worthy of being able to accept ourselves in our entirety. I'm just gonna pop some lashes on and we'll close it out. According to psychologist Albert Ellis, we have 2 choices in life, either to accept ourselves conditionally or unconditionally. Now, the first means that we can only appreciate who we are if certain conditions are met, like we win or we reach X milestone. The latter allows for us to accept ourselves no matter what the circumstance. We must choose wisely, because it's really a matter of staying stagnant or really truly living the life that we deserve to live. If we don't meet the conditions that we set, we create a dynamic where we can see ourselves in a negative, limiting light, when the reality is that we all fall short. I hope that we choose to accept and love ourselves unconditionally. If you have enjoyed this content and would like to see more about how psychology can walk and talk and show up in your everyday life, please feel free to subscribe, drop a comment, leave me a message, or send me a message, and I'll see you soon.